What would you do if someone walked into your business and asked the waiter to remove you thinking you didn't belong? What if you stayed silent, just long enough for the truth to change everything? Welcome to The Table by the Window, a powerful, emotionally rich story set in Denver about a man who's underestimated because of how he looks, until the world learns who he really is. If you're someone who loves stories with heart, depth, and a message that stays with you long after the last word, you're in the right place. Before we dive in, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you never miss more powerful stories like this one. And after you listen, drop a comment below. Let us know which part of the story spoke to you most, or share your own experience of being misjudged or underestimated. We read every one. Alright, take a deep breath. Let's begin. This is The Table by the Window. In the heart of Denver, where old jazz halls meet new skylines, a quiet man sits at a window table in his own restaurant, dressed simply, unnoticed by most. When a wealthy patron mistakes him for someone who doesn't belong, a moment of insult sparks a deeper reckoning about identity, legacy, and the meaning of power. The Table by the Window is a moving story about Isaiah Ellis, a black chef and entrepreneur whose calm dignity challenges class assumptions and redefines success. Through rich scenes of food, memory, and community, the story invites listeners into a world where quiet strength speaks louder than status, and where the most sacred tables are the ones built with love and made to welcome everyone. Settle in for a journey of grace, justice, and purpose. This is not just a story about a restaurant. It's about what happens when a man refuses to be underestimated and chooses instead to build a legacy. Disclaimer: the following story is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events, is purely coincidental. This narrative has been created for the purpose of conveying moral lessons, providing inspiration, and encouraging thoughtful reflection. It is not based on any specific individual, business, or true event. Viewer discretion is advised for those who may be sensitive to themes of discrimination or social injustice. Our goal is to spark conversation, promote empathy, and inspire growth. The lights of Soulfire Kitchen glowed against the deepening dusk, casting long amber streaks onto the wet pavement of Larimer Street. The spring air still carried a bite, laced with a faint smell of recent rain and the promise of a coming summer. Cars slowed as they passed the restaurant's elegant facade, some occupants pressing closer to their windows for a glimpse inside. Others waited under the awning, checking reservations on their phones or adjusting jackets against the chill. Inside, the atmosphere was alive. Polished wood floors reflected candlelight from the tables, and soft jazz curled through the air, mingling with the scent of slow-roasted short ribs, buttered cornbread, and hints of smoked paprika. Conversations hummed like an undertone beneath the music. Laughter floated from a corner booth. Waitstaff weaved gracefully between tables, balancing trays, topping off wine glasses, and offering warm smiles. At a small table near the window, tucked slightly away from the center but still with a clear view of the room, a man sat alone. He wore a charcoal gray sweater, loose at the shoulders, and a pair of dark jeans worn at the knees. His boots bore scuffs, but they were clean. The man's beard was neatly trimmed, peppered with gray, and his hands rested calmly on the table, one loosely holding a glass of sweet tea. His eyes moved slowly across the room, not watching so much as observing, quietly, intentionally, as if absorbing every detail. His name was Isaiah Ellis. To the casual diner, he might have looked like someone waiting for his check. Or maybe a walk-in who had gotten lucky with a window seat. There was nothing flashy about him, nothing that screamed for recognition. And yet, the staff moved around him with subtle awareness, a kind of invisible gravity that centered on his presence. Across the room, a waiter leaned over to adjust the candle on a newly set table. "Is Isaiah staying for dinner?" the waiter whispered to the hostess beside him. "Looks like it," she replied with a smile. "He's got his tea." The waiter nodded and moved along. But not everyone recognized the man by the window. At that moment, the door swung open again, ushering in a burst of cold air and a pair of new guests. The man led confidently, wearing a navy wool coat over a tailored suit, hair slicked back, and a glint of gold on his wrist. His name was Preston Whitaker, a well-known venture capitalist who had recently made headlines for a major real estate deal in downtown Denver. Following close behind was a woman in a cream-colored coat, high heels clicking softly on the floor as she surveyed the restaurant with a practiced eye. The hostess greeted them, already checking her tablet. "Mr. Whitaker," she said politely, "you're just a few minutes early. Your table is being prepped right now." Preston gave a tight smile and scanned the room. His eyes fell on Isaiah, who had just taken another sip of his drink. "Is that man supposed to be here?" Preston asked, lowering his voice only slightly. He doesn't look like a customer. The hostess blinked. Excuse me? That guy by the window, Preston said. Table 7. He looks out of place. The hostess paused. He's a regular guest, she said cautiously. Preston raised an eyebrow. Well, this is a fine establishment. You might want to be more selective about who you let sit front and center. We have standards, don't we? The hostess's face shifted slightly, but before she could respond, Preston waved toward a passing waiter. You, he said with a practiced air of entitlement. Would you mind asking that man to move? Or at least seat him somewhere less visible? The waiter froze mid-step. His eyes darted from Preston to Isaiah, then back again. Sir, he began. It's not complicated, Preston interrupted. He's obviously not dining. Do your job and make this place comfortable for paying guests. There was a moment of silence. A deep, slow silence that seemed to press against the walls of the restaurant. The hostess stiffened. The waiter's hand curled slightly around his notepad. At the center of it all, Isaiah took another sip of tea. If he had heard anything, he gave no sign. The silence broke with the soft sound of swinging kitchen doors. Out came a woman in a white chef's coat, sleeves rolled to her elbows, apron tied neatly at the back. Her name was Tara Mendez, executive chef and co-founder of Soulfire Kitchen. Behind her came Marcus Liu, the general manager, his expression calm but alert. Both of them walked directly toward the table by the window. As they approached, Tara's face lit up. Isaiah, she said warmly. Perfect timing. We just plated the first round of the spring tasting menu. Want to be our test run? Isaiah smiled, finally setting his tea down. Let's see what you've come up with, he said, voice smooth, deep, and unmistakably at ease. Marcus offered a respectful nod. The investor meeting went well, by the way. I'll bring you the summary once you're done eating. Behind them, Preston stood frozen, his mouth slightly open as realization flickered across his face. Isaiah Ellis wasn't a loiterer. He was the owner. The architect of every dish, every design choice, every wine pairing and playlist. He was the soul behind Soulfire Kitchen, and the man Preston had tried to dismiss as an unwanted distraction. The waiter turned back to Preston. Would you still like your table, sir? Preston cleared his throat, tugging at his cufflink. No, he said, barely audible. That won't be necessary. As he and his date made their quiet exit, Tara placed a plate of charred okra with lemon aioli in front of Isaiah, who leaned back, glanced out the window, and smiled. Outside, the city continued to move, oblivious to the small drama that had just unfolded inside one of its finest restaurants. But for those who had witnessed it, something unspoken had shifted. And for Isaiah Ellis, it was just another Saturday night at the table by the window. Long before the success of Soulfire Kitchen, before the reviews in glossy magazines and the murmurs of expansion, there was a much smaller kitchen, lit by a single bulb that swung slightly from a cracked ceiling. It sat behind a red brick house in the Five Points neighborhood of Denver, the walls lined with spice jars and iron skillets, the table always set for more people than it could hold. Isaiah Ellis had grown up in that house. His grandmother, Loretta Mae Ellis, had cooked in that kitchen nearly every day of her life. She had grown up in Alabama and moved to Colorado in the early 60s, seeking steadier work and a safer place to raise her family. What she carried with her was not just a collection of recipes, but a philosophy, a way of cooking that nourished more than the body. Isaiah, even as a child, had understood that. He remembered watching her hands move with deliberate care as she made sweet potato pie, the way she rolled out dough like it was a sacred ritual, how she always tasted the sauce 3 times before letting it simmer. Food for her was memory. It was celebration and healing. It was a protest against being forgotten. Isaiah had learned to cook beside her, balancing on a wooden stool, stirring when she said stir, adding a pinch of this or that. She taught him how to smell when the roux was ready, how to use heat like music, rising and falling, never rushed. She made him read history while the beans soaked. She told him about the people who came before, about the stories buried in every bite of cornbread and greens. As he grew older, Isaiah strayed. Like many young men, he wandered away from what he knew. He went to school, then dropped out. He spent a few years bouncing between community projects and activist circles, organizing food drives, helping local youth programs, speaking at city council meetings. He wasn't lost exactly, just searching for a way to make impact that would last. It was during a volunteer shift at a shelter that the idea came to him. He had cooked that night, just a simple meal of chicken and rice with sautéed squash and biscuits. Nothing fancy. But one of the older men had stood up after eating and said, "This tastes like my grandmother's kitchen." I ain't had food like this in 20 years. That moment stayed with Isaiah. He thought about how food could bring back the dead if only for a minute. How it could reach across pain and silence and remind people of who they were. That was the night he started sketching plans. He didn't have money. He didn't have formal training. But he had stories and recipes and a fire that wouldn't quit. So he called up Tara Mendez, a chef he had met during a community fundraiser. She had trained in New York but moved to Denver for the slower pace. They had clicked instantly, both of them obsessed with flavor, history, and the power of food to connect. He showed her his idea. More than a restaurant, a living memory of Black Southern cooking, elevated without being stripped of soul. She signed on that night. Together, they started testing recipes in Isaiah's apartment. Gumbo made with wild mushroom broth. Fried catfish seasoned with fennel pollen. Grits cooked low and slow with roasted garlic and duck fat. They kept a journal, jotting notes, sketching menus, arguing over plating techniques at midnight. Then came Marcus Liu, an old friend of Isaiah's from their activist days. Marcus had moved into hospitality and worked his way through the ranks at several high-end restaurants. When Isaiah pitched him the concept, Marcus said yes without blinking. They launched a crowdfunding campaign. They pitched small investors. They took out loans. They borrowed chairs from churches, tables from friends. The first Soulfire kitchen opened in a repurposed space on the edge of Lodo, with exposed brick walls and reclaimed wood. They painted it themselves. On opening night, only 20 people showed up. But by the third month, there was a waiting list. They hadn't done it the conventional way. There were no Michelin stars, no big PR firm. But people kept coming. Some for the food. Some for the warmth. Some just to see if the stories were true. And now, years later, Isaiah still preferred that same table by the window. He had been offered offices, a private dining suite, a rooftop lounge. But he kept coming back to table 7. It was the table with the view of the city. The table where he had first imagined what Soulfire could become. The one where he could sit quietly, watch the guests arrive, and remember the little boy on the wooden stool beside his grandmother, stirring sauce and listening to history. He had never needed a name tag. Never needed a suit. His presence was enough. And on nights like tonight, when someone tried to question his place at the table, he let the food do the talking. Because the food didn't lie. It never had. The week following the incident with Preston Whitaker passed quickly, and with it came a change in the air at Soulfire Kitchen. It wasn't just the spring weather warming the streets of Denver or the bloom of trees along the South Platte River. It was a shift inside the restaurant itself, subtle but felt. The staff had always known Isaiah Ellis, known the weight of his silence and the meaning behind his occasional raised eyebrow or soft nod. But now, in the wake of what had unfolded so publicly at Table 7, there was a renewed sense of loyalty. Not just to him but to what the restaurant represented. On Tuesday evening, the staff gathered briefly in the back hallway for the nightly pre-service huddle. Tara stood at the head of the group, apron dusted with flour, hair tied back, knife tucked into the fold of her belt. "New VIP tonight," she said, scanning the clipboard. "New York Times food editor. Try to keep it cool." A few raised eyebrows. "Isaiah will be here around 7. He'll be at his usual table." The team nodded. There was no need to explain what that meant. Meanwhile, in a private car rolling through the city, Preston Whitaker sat in silence. The backlash from the previous weekend had traveled further than he anticipated. He had underestimated Isaiah, not just as a businessman but as a man with reach. His comment, overheard and retold by several patrons, had made its way to a local blog. From there, it was picked up by a columnist who framed it as a parable about class, race, and power in modern Denver. Preston had spent the better part of the week dodging side eyes at his country club and answering awkward calls from business partners asking what exactly had happened at Soulfire Kitchen. It irritated him deeply. The worst part was, no one at the restaurant had publicly said anything. No statements. No tweets. No dramatic callouts. It was the silence, the restraint, that made it sting the most. He had been dismissed not with outrage but with dignity. That somehow made it worse. He had sent flowers. No response. He had asked a mutual acquaintance to reach out. Isaiah had said nothing. And now, here he was, being driven past the restaurant each evening, unable to decide whether to go back and apologize or forget it entirely. The latter was easier. But the former, it gnawed at him. Back inside the restaurant, the night rolled forward with seamless elegance. A couple celebrating their anniversary was seated at the booth beneath the mural of Isaiah's grandmother. A group of tech executives laughed over bourbon cocktails in the back. The scent of thyme, butter, and charred peach filled the air. At table 7, Isaiah sat with his notebook open beside a steaming bowl of black-eyed pea stew. Tara had just dropped it off herself. "Change the stock," she said. "Use turkey bones this time. Let me know if it's missing anything." Isaiah tasted it slowly, letting the heat settle. He nodded once. "Needs a little more vinegar. Just a touch. Otherwise it's singing." She grinned and walked back toward the kitchen. A young server approached next, one of the newer hires. Her name was Tasha. She was nervous around Isaiah, not because he was intimidating but because of the quiet way he seemed to see through everyone. "Mr. Ellis," she said, placing a folded piece of paper in front of him. "A guest requested to be seated near you tonight. I told them that table was already booked, but they asked me to give you this." Isaiah glanced down. The handwriting was sharp and formal. It read, "I owe you an apology. I didn't see you for who you are. May I speak with you if only for a moment? Preston Whitaker." Isaiah said nothing for a long time. He stared out the window as the street lights began to shimmer across the glass, casting their reflection against the polished surface of the table. Then he folded the note and slid it beneath his tea glass. "Tell him I'm unavailable tonight," he said softly. Tasha hesitated, then nodded and walked away. Moments later, Marcus stopped by the table with a quiet smirk. He had heard. "Trouble follows you even when you're not looking for it," he said. Isaiah didn't smile, but his eyes glimmered with something close to amusement. "I don't mind trouble," he said. "I just like to see it coming." Marcus gave a quiet chuckle and moved on. The night continued, smooth and steady, like a record playing on low volume. Across the room, guests savored dishes and traded stories. No one outside the staff knew about the note, or the fact that Isaiah had quietly refused the man who once asked him to be removed. There was power in silence. There was power in restraint. And Isaiah had learned long ago that the loudest thing a man could say was sometimes said by doing nothing at all. The following Sunday brought a rare quiet to Denver's streets. Church bells rang in the distance, and the city seemed to exhale after a week of movement. For Isaiah, Sundays were sacred. Soulfire Kitchen was closed, the lights dimmed, the kitchen cold. It was the only day the entire staff was off, a tradition he insisted on even during their busiest seasons. That morning, Isaiah drove through the Curtis Park neighborhood, past century-old houses and cracked sidewalks lined with trees in bloom. He turned down a familiar block where the pavement still bore the scars of long-forgotten construction, and parked in front of a modest duplex painted pale yellow with chipped white trim. The front yard was small but neat, with a rose bush on each side of the steps and wind chimes dancing lazily in the breeze. He knocked once and waited. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 70s, short and sturdy, with silver braids pinned up beneath a paisley scarf. She wore an apron flecked with flour and smelled of cinnamon and soap. "Lord, you still knock?" she said, stepping aside with a wide grin. "Boy, this is your second home." Isaiah smiled and stepped in. "I got manners, Aunt Thelma." "Well, manners or not, you're late. I told you 10. It's 10:08. "That ain't 10, she muttered, walking back into the kitchen. The kitchen had barely changed since Isaiah's childhood. Same faded linoleum floors, same heavy wooden table in the center, same wall clock that ran 5 minutes fast. The smell was unmistakable, fresh biscuits, peach jam, and something slow cooking in the crock-pot. A gospel record spun faintly in the background, old and crackly but warm. He took his usual seat at the table while Aunt Thelma set down a plate. "Eat before it gets cold. Then you can tell me what all that nonsense was about at your restaurant last week." Isaiah raised an eyebrow. "You heard?" Thelma gave him a look. "You think Black Twitter don't talk? Baby, they talk. And they were loud. Somebody tried to move you out your own restaurant?" "MMM." He dug into the biscuit and grits, savoring the bite before answering. "It's already over." Thelma sat across from him, folding her arms. "No, it ain't. Not really. See, folks don't just disrespect you in public like that by accident. That kind of thing comes from the root." Isaiah nodded slowly. "He thought I was nobody. That was the root." Thelma leaned back. "Well, that's the thing about roots. You can't always pull 'em out with talk. You gotta starve 'em. Let 'em wither." They sat in silence for a while. Thelma sipped coffee from a chipped mug. Isaiah ate slowly, lost in thought. "You ever regret not making Soulfire over here?" she asked. 5 Points could have used something like that. He looked up, thoughtful. "I wanted to. I still do. But the money wasn't there back then. I had to start where we could get a lease." She nodded. "I get it. But don't forget this neighborhood. It raised you." He smiled. "I won't." After breakfast, he helped her wash the dishes. They moved in rhythm like they'd done 100 times before. When they finished, she handed him a small bundle wrapped in foil. "Take that with you. It's the last of the jam. I'll bring the jars back." "You better. Those are vintage." He laughed and hugged her before heading out. Back in his car, Isaiah didn't drive straight home. Instead, he took a slow route through the city, letting his mind drift. His phone buzzed twice in the console. He didn't check it. The sky had shifted from overcast to clear, and the light caught on the rooftops like fire. He found himself parking outside an old furniture workshop on the edge of the art district. A wooden sign above the door read Ash and Ashwood. Inside, the air smelled of sawdust and varnish. A bell chimed as he stepped in. "Isaiah," came a voice from the back. "You looking for trouble or a new table?" "I'm thinking trouble," he replied, grinning. A tall man with dark skin and long dreadlocks stepped out from behind a half-finished bar top. His name was Langston Ash, a craftsman and longtime friend who had designed nearly every table and chair in Soulfire Kitchen. Langston wiped his hands on a towel. "What's the occasion?" Isaiah glanced around at the polished ashwood, the tools lined up like instruments, the soft hum of a saw still echoing from the back. "I need a new table," Isaiah said. Langston raised an eyebrow. "You finally retiring the window seat?" "No. Not for me," Isaiah replied. "For 5 points. I'm opening a second location." Langston stared at him for a long moment, then smiled. "I'll build the table. You just keep telling the story." Isaiah nodded. He could already see it. The space, the smells, the music, the mural of his grandmother's hands. A place for the neighborhood. A place that wouldn't ask anyone to move. A table where everyone belonged. The first signs of summer arrived early that year. Denver's air turned warmer, golden with pollen and promise. Sidewalk cafes spilled into the streets, parks brimmed with music, and the evening sun lingered, draping the city in soft orange before slipping behind the mountains. Inside Soulfire Kitchen, the mood was shifting too. The team was moving with more precision than ever, each dish plated like a love letter, each greeting filled with the kind of warmth that couldn't be trained. Marcus had taken to arriving an hour early just to walk the floor and feel the energy. Tara spent more time in the test kitchen, preparing new dishes for a menu refresh. Isaiah, meanwhile, had grown quieter, focused. Always watching. Always writing. One evening, as the restaurant buzzed with a soft hum of conversation and clinking glasses, Tasha approached Isaiah's table with a small envelope. "This came for you," she said, setting it down. It was sealed in thick cream paper, handwritten in deep blue ink. Isaiah broke the seal and read silently. "Mr. Ellis, the board of the Denver Museum of Cultural History cordially invites you to be the keynote speaker at this year's Southern Heritage and Culinary Arts Gala. Your story and your work have become a part of this city's living history. We would be honored to hear your voice. Dr. Lillian Carrington, Gala Chair." He read it twice, then set it down beside his glass of iced tea. Tasha, curious but composed, asked, "Are you going to do it?" Isaiah didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted toward the mural on the far wall, the one of his grandmother, Loretta May, standing in front of a stove, a red scarf wrapped around her head, her face half lit in memory. "I haven't decided," he said finally. Tasha tilted her head. "But, isn't that exactly what you want? To tell the story?" He looked at her kindly. "Sometimes telling the story means knowing who it's for. Some rooms want your story but not your presence." Tasha nodded, taking in the weight of that. That night, after the restaurant closed, Isaiah stayed late. He stood alone in the dining room with the chairs stacked, the lights low, the quiet pressing in around him like velvet. He walked the floor slowly, his footsteps soft against the wood. He stopped at the mural and studied it. His grandmother's hands were clasped gently, a mixing bowl nestled between them. The artist had painted them with such care, each wrinkle a map of time, each line a testament to work done in love. "Would you speak?" he asked the stillness. The mural said nothing. But somehow he felt the answer. 2 days later, he drove out to the Denver Museum of Cultural History, a building of glass and stone rising just beyond the Capitol. Inside, the space smelled faintly of books and cedar. A tall woman with salt and pepper curls greeted him in the atrium. "Mr. Ellis, I'm Dr. Carrington. Thank you for coming." She offered a hand. Isaiah shook it firmly. "I wasn't sure I would," he said. She smiled. "I wasn't sure you would either. But I hoped." They walked together down a long hallway lined with photographs, black jazz musicians, civil rights marches, handwritten menus from soul food diners long gone. "I've followed your journey for years," Dr. Carrington said. Your restaurant isn't just a business. It's an archive. Every plate you serve is a page. Isaiah remained quiet, eyes scanning the exhibits. She stopped at a display featuring a faded photograph of a southern kitchen. Wooden counters, cast iron pots, a woman standing over a stove. I know this one, Isaiah said, stepping closer. She was from Mississippi. Her name was Luella Knox. She fed 3 generations out of that kitchen. She looks like someone I knew, he murmured. Dr. Carrington turned to him. The gala won't just be about cuisine. It's about legacy. I don't want a polished speech. I want truth. Tell them about the table. The one by the window. The one you built without needing to ask permission. Isaiah considered this. I'll think about it. I hope you'll say yes. Back at Soulfire Kitchen, preparations for expansion quietly accelerated. The second location, slated for 5 Points, was taking shape. Langston had delivered the first sketches of the custom Ashwood table. Tara was working on a new menu that would spotlight ancestral dishes reimagined with local ingredients. And Marcus had already begun hiring, starting with a handful of young servers from the neighborhood. Isaiah moved between both sites, guiding without hovering, observing the way the soul of the place translated across walls and blocks. Then one evening a reservation appeared on the calendar. Whitaker, Preston. Party of 2. 7:30 p.m. Marcus raised an eyebrow when he saw it. You want me to cancel it? Isaiah shook his head. Let it stand. That night, Preston arrived with a woman in a navy dress and polite smile. They were seated at table 11, far from the window, near the open kitchen. Isaiah made no move to greet them. Instead, he remained at his usual spot, table 7, writing quietly in his notebook. Tasha served the Whitakers with professional grace. There was no trace of the past in her tone, no edge in her smile. Just hospitality. At one point, Preston glanced toward Isaiah. Isaiah looked up just once. Their eyes met. Isaiah gave a single, small nod. Not of forgiveness, not of invitation, but acknowledgement. Then he returned to his notes, and the room kept humming. The first night of Soulfire Kitchen, 5 Points wasn't meant to be perfect. Isaiah had told the staff that over and over again in the days leading up to the opening. Aim for meaningful, not flawless, he'd said. Let them feel what we're about. The rest will follow. And they did. The sun dipped behind the rooftops of the historic neighborhood as the scent of smoked collards, slow-cooked lamb shank and roasted garlic butter biscuits drifted onto the sidewalk. Strings of warm Edison lights lit the outdoor patio, where elders sipped iced tea and tapped their feet to the rhythm of a live jazz trio playing under a red awning. Inside, the restaurant pulsed with a kind of reverence. The walls were lined with sepia photographs of families from the neighborhood: cooks, barbers, activists, and teachers. One wall bore a mural of Isaiah's grandmother's hands once again, but this time, they were holding a cast-iron skillet over a blooming garden. A symbol not just of memory but of growth. At the center of the dining room stood Langston's masterpiece, the Ashwood table. Smooth as river stone, with wide, rounded edges and carvings along the legs that looked like tree roots. It was polished but not flashy. It had weight. It had presence. It was, as Tara put it when she first saw it, a table you come home to. Isaiah stood near the bar as the first guests began to trickle in. He wasn't wearing a chef's coat tonight, just a linen shirt with rolled sleeves and dark jeans. The room filled slowly like a church on Easter Sunday. Familiar faces mingled with new ones. A few city officials. A handful of artists. The elderly jazz musician from down the block who'd once played with Nina Simone. A girl with green hair and a sketch pad. A single mother and her son. No velvet ropes. No pretense. Just community. Marcus leaned in from behind the bar. We ready? Isaiah glanced around, exhaled. We are. The night unfolded like a well-practiced song. The kitchen worked in tight harmony, dishes emerged with perfect timing, and the buzz of conversation never overpowered the music. Laughter spilled out onto the sidewalk. One couple danced under the strings of lights. A man in a bow tie read a poem aloud at his table. Halfway through service, Dr. Carrington arrived with a small entourage. She gave Isaiah a firm hug and whispered, "Say yes." He hadn't given her an answer about the gala yet. But now, in this room, in this light, with the smell of fried catfish and rosemary still hanging in the air, something inside him shifted. Later that night, after the last plate was cleared and the last guest had wandered out, Isaiah found himself alone at the Ashwood table. A few candles still flickered. His staff had gone home, exhausted and beaming. The music had stopped. And in the silence, Isaiah sat. He reached into his jacket pocket and unfolded a single sheet of paper. A draft of the speech he'd been avoiding. He read the words silently. Then, with the soft scrape of wood on wood, he slid the paper across the table. As he did, he imagined himself standing before that gala crowd, looking out at polished faces and eager eyes. He imagined beginning like this. There is a difference between being invited to the table and building your own. I was once asked to leave a table I had already set. That was the moment I knew my story would not be told by permission. It would be told in the fire and in the food. He folded the paper and stood. Outside, the street was quiet again, just the hum of crickets and the sound of a night bus a few blocks away. Isaiah locked the door behind him. The next morning he called Dr. Carrington. "I'll speak at the gala," he said. She sounded like she'd been holding her breath. "Wonderful. I'll confirm your slot. Anything else you need?" "Yes," Isaiah said. "One more seat at the front. For a guest I'm inviting personally." The night of the gala arrived with soft rain and polished shoes. The Denver Museum of Cultural History glittered beneath amber lights, its great glass entrance glowing like a lighthouse. Inside, the grand hall was filled with round tables dressed in white linen and adorned with bouquets of sage and rosemary. Each guest had a nameplate, a delicate menu card, and a small silver fork resting beside a gold-rimmed plate. When Isaiah took the stage, dressed in a charcoal suit with no tie, the room fell still. He stood behind the podium for a moment, saying nothing. Then, finally, he began. "I grew up in a kitchen where stories were folded into the batter, where silence meant respect and food was the language we all spoke fluently. My grandmother taught me that a table was more than a place to eat, it was a place to be seen." He paused, his eyes scanning the room. "I opened Soulfire Kitchen not to impress, but to remember. And I built it in a city where legacy is often overwritten by money, by names on buildings, by who you know. But I chose to build something that couldn't be bought." He spoke of his family, of the early days when the tables wobbled and the rent was late. He spoke of his staff, of Tara's fire and Marcus's humor and the young servers learning the difference between seasoning and soul. And then, carefully, without bitterness, he told the story of the night a wealthy patron mistook him for someone who didn't belong. He didn't say Preston's name. But Preston knew. Because he was seated at the front table, invited by Isaiah himself. Not out of grace but out of clarity. "Some tables are built from ash and memory," Isaiah said, his voice calm and clear. "They're not meant to impress. They're meant to endure." When he stepped away from the podium, the applause was slow at first, then rising, then thunderous. 3 weeks after the gala, Denver woke to a light summer breeze and the scent of possibility. A new mural had appeared on the alley wall beside Soulfire Kitchen. 5 points, painted in hues of sunrise and shadow. It depicted a child at a dinner table, hands outstretched, eyes closed in a moment of grace. Behind the child, ancestral figures, farmers, bakers, midwives, teachers, stood like quiet sentinels. Each wore a knowing smile. The artist hadn't signed their name. They never did. But everyone in the neighborhood knew the story behind it. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with life, a midday rush that pulsed like a heartbeat. The second location was thriving. Isaiah had handed off daily operations to Marcus and Tara, both of whom moved through the space like seasoned dancers, each pivot and glance a conversation. Marcus had started a mentorship program that paired young people from the neighborhood with staff mentors, teaching both front-of-house skills and kitchen craft. Tara had launched a Saturday supper series that featured visiting chefs reinterpreting ancestral recipes. Every seat was filled week after week. The original Soulfire Kitchen, tucked away near Union Station, remained a quieter hum, more refined but no less soulful. Locals still brought first dates and anniversaries there. The table by the window, once anonymous, had become a kind of silent pilgrimage spot, booked weeks in advance by those who wanted to sit where the story began. On a Wednesday afternoon, Isaiah returned to the original restaurant alone. He wore his usual, linen shirt, worn-in jeans, and sneakers that told of long walks and work done with purpose. He wasn't there to meet anyone. He just wanted to sit. Tasha, now a senior manager between both locations, greeted him with a knowing smile. "Table 7? Isaiah shook his head. "The window." She paused, surprised, then nodded and gestured him toward it. Sunlight poured through the wide glass pane. The street outside was calm, with a streetcar rumbling past and an old man sweeping his porch across the road. He sat down, folded his hands and looked around. The restaurant had changed since that night. New light fixtures. Softer wood floors. The mural had been gently restored. But the spirit was unchanged. A group of college students chatted at the back table. A woman with silver braids sipped tea and scribbled in a journal. A father fed spoonfuls of mashed yams to a wiggling toddler in a high chair. Everyone was welcome. Everyone belonged. As Isaiah watched the room, a shadow passed by the window. A figure hesitated, then stepped inside. It was a young man, maybe 22, with thick glasses and a threadbare hoodie. He carried a backpack and looked around nervously. After a moment, he approached Isaiah's table. "Excuse me, sir," he said, shifting his weight awkwardly. "Are you the owner?" Isaiah looked up and nodded. "I am." The young man blinked. "I just wanted to say, I'm from Aurora. My mom used to make catfish every Friday, and your kitchen, it reminded me of her. I saved up to come here. I'm applying to culinary school next fall. Just thank you for building this." Isaiah smiled. Not wide, not performative, just full of something deep. "What's your name?" he asked. "Jalen." "You hungry, Jalen?" He nodded, embarrassed. "Kind of." "Then sit. This table's already set." Jalen hesitated, then lowered himself into the seat across from Isaiah. Tasha, watching from across the room, smiled and brought 2 menus without being asked. For the next hour, Isaiah and Jalen talked about gumbo and gentrification, about kitchens and culture, about starting where you are with what you have. The young man asked questions with wide eyes and listened like a sponge. Before he left, Isaiah wrote down a name and number on a napkin. "Come by 5 Points next week. Tell them I sent you." Jalen took it like it was a key. That evening, Isaiah returned home to his apartment above the bookstore near Welton Street. He pulled out a battered leather-bound journal and scribbled down a few notes. Build the 3rd location near Montbello. Invite more youth into the kitchen. Host the elders' oral history dinner this fall. Plant herbs in the alley behind the 5 Point spot. And never forget. He stopped there. Then wrote, "The table is only sacred if you make room." He closed the journal and exhaled. Somewhere in the city, a young man was walking home with a napkin in his pocket and a new story beginning in his chest. And in a quiet room above the lights and laughter, Isaiah Ellis let the day settle. Not with triumph. Not with conclusion. But with purpose. The kind of purpose that built homes, not headlines. The kind of purpose that laid wood upon wood, word upon word. And set a table for tomorrow. The end. Here are 7 moral lessons drawn from the table by the window. 1. Dignity is not defined by appearances. When Isaiah first sits at his own table, simply dressed, quiet, and unassuming, Preston Whitaker assumes he is out of place. This moment powerfully illustrates how society often assigns value based on appearances, wealth, dress, posture, skin. But dignity, like strength, lives in how one carries themselves, not in how they are perceived. Isaiah doesn't need to explain or defend himself. His confidence comes from identity, not validation. The lesson is clear. A person's worth is not determined by how others see them but by how they know themselves. Judging someone based on surface traits reveals more about the one doing the judging than the one being judged. 2. Legacy is built through intention, not inheritance. Isaiah didn't inherit a culinary empire. He built it, piece by piece, from the ashes of memory and the grit of experience. Through Soulfire Kitchen, he honors the women who came before him. His grandmother, Loretta May, and every elder whose stories were passed through food and silence rather than textbooks and stages. This lesson reminds us that legacy isn't about what you're given, but what you choose to grow from. It's in how you carry the stories of those who came before you and how you plant seeds for those who'll come after. Legacy is intentional. You don't stumble into it, you live it out. 3. Power is quiet when it knows itself. In a world obsessed with visibility and control, Isaiah's calm demeanor is a subtle yet striking form of resistance. He doesn't confront Preston with anger. He doesn't gloat when he is revealed as the owner. He lets truth speak for itself. This kind of restraint is a power that many overlook. A strength that doesn't need to flex. The lesson here is that true power doesn't posture. It listens, it waits, it stands firm. In Isaiah's silence, we find a moral contrast to the wealthy man's noise. Knowing who you are allows you to move through the world with grace, even in the face of insult or assumption. 4. Community is cultivated at the table. From the young servers being trained at Soulfire Kitchen, to the murals of elders, to the quiet acts of mentorship, Isaiah builds not just a business, but a sanctuary. The table becomes a symbol of inclusion, restoration, and voice, a place where people from all walks of life are seen, heard, and fed. This story reminds us that community isn't just about geography or proximity. It's about making space for others. It's about intentional acts of hospitality. Whether it's welcoming a stranger, mentoring a young dreamer, or preserving memory through food, community is built by those who see the table not as a gate but as a gathering place. 5. Justice can be poetic, not punitive. When Isaiah invites Preston to the gala, he doesn't do it out of vengeance. He does it so the man can witness the full weight of what he once dismissed. Isaiah doesn't try to humiliate Preston. He allows him to sit in discomfort, to listen, to reflect. In our world, justice often feels tied to punishment. But here it is shown through revelation. The tables are turned not with cruelty but with clarity. Preston has no public fall but a private reckoning. And that is sometimes more powerful. The story teaches us that growth doesn't always come from shame. Sometimes it comes from being forced to see and sit with what you never bothered to understand. 6. Growth requires knowing when to lead and when to step back. As Isaiah's restaurant expands, he begins to step away from the day-to-day operations, trusting Tara, Marcus, and the younger generation to carry the flame forward. He doesn't cling to control. He becomes a guide, not a gatekeeper. There's wisdom in this. Real leadership is not about being the center of everything. It's about recognizing when to empower others, when to make space for different voices, and when to let the work outgrow your own hands. The story tells us that growth doesn't always mean doing more. It can also mean letting go and trusting others to carry the vision further than you ever could alone. 7. The most sacred tables are the ones we make room at. Isaiah's final act, welcoming a young stranger named Jalen to the table and offering him mentorship, is not just a gesture of kindness. It's a declaration of belief. Belief that stories continue, that opportunity should be passed forward, that every person deserves a place to belong. This is the heart of the story. The table Isaiah built was never about ego. It was about inclusion. It was about building something lasting, not for applause, but for purpose. The lesson here is simple and profound. The most powerful tables are not those we sit at alone, but those we extend to others. The moral is not just generosity. It's responsibility. To remember, to reach, to remake the world in small, shared moments. In closing, The Table by the Window is more than a story of class, race, and misunderstanding. It is a meditation on identity, dignity, and the power of place. Each chapter reveals not just a change in character, but a deeper truth about how we live, how we lead, and how we love. And in the end, we learn this, that in a world full of closed doors and velvet ropes, the most radical thing we can do is build a table and make room. Let me know if you'd like these lessons formatted for voiceover or turned into a written reflection for a different medium. Thank you for watching and listening to The Table by the Window. We hope this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think a little differently about how we see one another in this world. Stories like this remind us that strength doesn't always shout, and that dignity, when quiet and rooted, can shift an entire room. If you enjoyed this video, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss future stories that uplift, challenge, and connect. We'd love to hear your thoughts too. Leave a comment below and let us know what part of this story stayed with you. And if you're hungry for more powerful storytelling, be sure to check out the other videos on this channel. Each one crafted to inspire, reflect, and make space for deeper meaning. Again, thank you for being here. Until next time, keep listening, keep learning, and never stop making room at the table.